All right, we are live. Welcome to Sports Talk, everyone. This is episode 3 of our weekly Sports Talk episodes. And today we are going to be covering some Major League Baseball with the NLCS and ALCS in the heat of things. The Indians about to play the Blue Jays in Game 5, first pitch being in about 7 minutes. They hold a 3-1 lead over Toronto right now. Does Cleveland, looking for their first World Series title since 1997. And then also tonight is Game 4 of the Dodgers and Cubs, with the Dodgers leading 2-1. So we will go over those 2 games. Also, I have a big announcement regarding baseball that I think you guys will like, and I'll share that with you guys in a little bit. Then we'll move on to some college football. I'll reveal the new rankings this week, as well as go over the big matchups this week, as one of the biggest ones being Texas A&M and Alabama. And then we will end it with our Heisman watch list and who I think will win the Power 5 conferences. After that, we will move on to some NBA, where we will talk about the final preseason scores of this year, and also the GM polls that came out yesterday, which came with some pretty interesting news that I think you guys will like. And after that, we move on to NHL, where we will talk about the early season standings and the scoring leaders through the first week and a half of the season. And then I have a question for you guys, the viewers, when it comes to NHL today. And then finally, we move to NFL, where I will go over some Week 6 scores, the big game from Odell Beckham Jr., Ben Roethlisberger's injury, and then we'll end the show with some Week 7 key injuries and Week 7 predictions. So I hope you guys stick around. Those of you that are coming back, as I said last week, those of you that are returning, I thank you for your support, and let's keep this ship riding strong, shall we? And those of you that are here for the first time, I thank you for giving me a shot, and I hope you enjoy the show. So let's start with some baseball. Those of you that watched Game 3 of the Blue Jays and Indians know about Trevor Bauer and his finger injury. Trevor Bauer was working with a drone, and he apparently had a malfunction which caused the propeller in the drone to slice off part of his finger. So that's sad. Unfortunate for him, obviously. But, I mean, I get it in a sense that I know that he said in his press conference that working with the drones was a way for him to calm down before a game. And if that's the case, that makes sense that he does that. But also, you have to think that it's Game 3 of the ALCS. You can't be risking your injury like that. I mean, malfunctions are very rare when it comes to mechanical stuff, but they do happen, and I think Trevor Bauer had to realize that when that happened. But those of you that didn't watch the game, Trevor Bauer went on the mound in Game 3, lasted about 20 pitches, and then was pulled because the stitches in his finger opened up, and his finger started bleeding all over the place. So they ended up winning that game, though. The bullpen went 8 1/3. Beautiful. Recent news, though, about his finger. Trevor Bauer, he got it restitched up, and he's hopeful that he can make it back for the World Series. So, hopefully, I like Trevor Bauer. I'm a fan of them, and I hope that he does very solid if he gets to pitch again in the World Series. So, we will move on to the preview of today's Game 5 between the Indians and the Blue Jays. The Indians could not finish the 4-game sweep yesterday. They fell to the Blue Jays in Game 4 by a score of 5-1. The winning pitcher in that game, if you did not watch, was Aaron Sanchez, and the loser was Corey Kluber. The Blue Jays struck first in the third with a solo home run from Josh Donaldson to left center field. Extended that lead with a hit from Enrique Carrera, who played at home Troy Tulowitzki and made it 2-0 in the fourth. A Perez double for the Indians. Roberto Perez doubled in the fifth to make it 2-1. But after that, that was as close as the Indians would get, as Edwin Encarnacion hit a 2-run single with the bases loaded in the seventh, and then a sacrifice fly from Kevin Pillar put the dagger in Game 4. Like I said a couple minutes ago, Game 5 is set to for first pitch in about 3 minutes now. I will preview that game for you guys here really quick. The matchup today is the rookie Ryan Merritt taking on Marco Estrada. Marco Estrada has been amazing in the postseason so far. He is listed as 0-1, but his ERA is sub-2. And the one game that he took the loss with Corey Kluber was just a little better. The Indians going with the left-hander, Ryan Merritt, who will be making his postseason debut after spending most of the season at AAA Columbus. And an interesting fact for this game today, the Blue Jays' 5 runs in Game 4 were more than they had scored in the first 3 games combined, which shows that maybe their bats are starting to heat up a little bit. The Indians did get through Game 4 without using their 2 best relievers, Cody Allen and Andrew Miller. They both played vital roles in the beginning of the series, and they will also be rested for Game 5. So they will not be used today. Merritt has pitched in 4 regular season games with the Indians, 1 start. He's 1-0 with a 1.64 ERA, and with Columbus in 24 starts, he was 11-8 with a 3.7 ERA. Marco Estrada this season against Cleveland is 0-0 with an ERA near 4 at 3.75. So Blue Jays, can they win and force a Game 6? Or will the Indians capture the American League pennant tonight and advance to their first World Series in 19 years? Now we'll move on to the NLCS, where if you did not watch the pivotal Game 3 last night that was captured by the Los Angeles Dodgers behind an amazing pitching performance from Rich Hill over Jake Arrieta. Arrieta went 5 innings, gave up 4 earned, 5 strikeouts, but he gave up 2 home runs, while Rich Hill went 6 innings, only gave up 2 hits, and had 6 strikeouts. So very efficient game. And also the Dodgers bullpen combined for 3 innings of 2-hit, no-run baseball with 4 strikeouts. So they earned that victory, no doubt. Final score was 6-0. Corey Seager opened the scoring in the 3rd inning, where he singled home Andrew Tolles to make it 1-0 Dodgers. In the 4th, a 2-run home run from Yasmani Grandal made it 3-0. 6th inning, Justin Turner hit a solo home run to center that made it 4-0. Jock Peterson doubled home Yasiel Puig in the 8th to make it 5-0. And then Grandal grounded out to short, which scored Peterson and made it 6-0 Dodgers, which was the final score. And they also play today. Game 4 is tonight between the Dodgers and the Cubs. It will be John Lackey against Julio Urias. Quite possibly the oldest pitcher in baseball against the youngest pitcher in baseball. John Lackey, 37 years old. He's doesn't have a decision yet in the playoffs, but his ERA is up near 6.75. And he's facing 20-year-old Julio Urias, one of the big prospects coming up for the Dodgers. He was 24. John Lackey was 24 when he started Game 7 for the Angels in 2002, in which he won the World Series. But now here we are 13 years later, and he's trying to win another key game, this time for the Chicago Cubs. Urias will be the youngest pitcher to start a playoff game in MLB history tonight. He faced the Cubs twice and had very mixed results. In his first one, he gave up 6 runs, 5 of them earned on 8 hits. It was his second start in the majors. And then a couple months later, on August 27th, he struck out 8, gave up 6 hits, and walked 2 in 6 innings to capture a win. And Dave Roberts, manager of the Dodgers, said that he's gotten to know Julio as a calm and collected young 20-year-old pitcher, and he's going to go out there and try and focus and execute his pitches, which is very key for the Dodgers' success because of how young he is for this big of a stage. The Cubs are considered by almost everyone to be the best team in baseball. And you've got this 20-year-old pitcher going out in Game 4 of the National League Championship Series. He's the only thing standing between the Chicago Cubs and their first World Series in 108 years. That's terrifying to me, to be a pitcher in that kind of scenario that young. But Julio Urias, we'll see if he handles the pressure and gets the Dodgers one win away from the World Series. So now we will talk about Rich Hill and that amazing pitching performance last night that took the world by storm, and definitely the baseball world. Most of America watching that game, they don't know who Rich Hill is. Rich Hill, let me give you a little bit of background information. He's 36 years old. He's a 6'5" lefty. He was drafted in the 4th round of the 2002 draft by the Chicago Cubs. He began his professional career with the Boise Hawks, where he was 0-2 with an 8.36 ERA in 6 games. He was horrible in his minor league career. He finally made his first major league start on July 25th of 2005, and he lasted 5 innings. He returned to the majors in 2006 and 2007. And then in 2008, he had problems with his command. He struggled in the season. And then in his final start, he walked 4 of the first 6 batters he faced and was removed. He was optioned back down to AAA. He was traded to Baltimore in 2009, signed a minor league contract in 2010 with the Cardinals, and then later they cut him. And then he signed a minor league contract with the Boston Red Sox, a minor league contract after 3 years off of baseball. He signed a minor league contract to the Cleveland Indians. And then after another year off, he signed with the Red Sox. Then another year off, he signed with the Nationals. And then he came back to the Dodgers this year. He started with Oakland this year. And he went 9-3 in 14 starts with a 2.25 ERA. Traded to the Dodgers. And on September the 10th, this guy who took 5 years of his past 7 years off of baseball, he pitched 7 perfect innings. It was the first time in Major League history that a manager pulled a pitcher in the 7th inning or later with a perfect game still intact. That's insane. No one knew this guy. He was supposed to be a washout. He stopped playing baseball competitively in 2010. That's 6 years ago. Back when he was 30, he gave up on baseball. And now he's got the Dodgers ahead of the best team in baseball, the Chicago Cubs. And 2 wins away from the World Series. That's amazing. I'm here to give you guys a score update really quick on the Indians and Blue Jays. They are 2 outs into the game. Marco Estrada has gotten Carlos Santana and Jason Kipnis both to ground out. Kipnis grounded out to short and Santana grounded out to second. So Marco Estrada off to a pretty strong start at home in Game 5 of the ALCS, where the Blue Jays try to stay alive. So now I will give you guys my predictions for the rest of the ALCS and NLCS. I see the Blue Jays defending their home field again today, and then heading back to Cleveland, and I see the Indians winning Game 6 and heading to the World Series after Game 6. I think the Indians' pitching has been very surprising this year in terms of how good they were to begin the year, and then all those injuries to their key starters, Carlos Carrasco, Danny Salazar, Corey Kluber was out a little while. Trevor Bauer just cut his finger on a drone. But they still held strong. They're starting a freaking AAA pitcher tonight in Game 5 of the ALCS, and they're still 1 win away from the World Series. So whatever the Indians are doing, it's working. And I just think the Indians have too much momentum for the Blue Jays to crawl back into this. I really like Andrew Miller out of that bullpen, as well as Cody Allen, and then the clutch bats of Jason Kipnis, Lonnie Chisenhall, and Francisco Lindor. I just don't see the Blue Jays getting back into the series. I see the Indians in 6. And then in the NLCS, I see the Cubs somehow coming back. I think the Cubs can do it. I like the Cubs in 7 games to win Game 7 at Wrigley and to advance to the World Series to face the Indians. I just think the Cubs have made it this far. I like their bats. Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, I think will start to pick it up. Addison Russell, Ben Zobrist, Dexter Fowler, and then they have very quality veteran pitchers, John Lester, John Lackey, Jake Arrieta, and then they have also Kyle Hendricks, who's 25 years old, but he was arguably the best pitcher in baseball this year, only giving up about 2 runs every 9 innings he pitched, which is very, very solid. So I like the Cubs in 7 and the Indians in 6. And stay tuned for next week's show where I will give you guys my World Series predictions. And I'm excited for that, and we will see that next week. So we will end our talk on baseball today with an announcement that I have been very excited to make. I made this decision last week after last week's show, and I'm excited to share this with you guys. For the upcoming World Series, my goal as a broadcaster, one of my big goals, is to be a play-by-play broadcaster for a Major League Baseball team. And I have made the decision that for Game 1 of the World Series, you guys will get a 3-inning play-by-play broadcast of Game 1, I wanted to make it only 3 innings, so that way it's only about an hour. I don't want to make a 3.5-hour video, which would be really, really boring and I think annoying for you guys as the viewers. So I'm sticking to 3 innings just so you can give me a little bit of critique and listen to how I think I'd go about doing play-by-play broadcast of the World Series. So I'm very excited for that. That will be Game 1 of the World Series from whether it's in Chicago, Cleveland, Toronto, or LA. Wherever it's at, I am going to do a play-by-play broadcast for the first 3 innings, starting with the first pitch and going all the way to the end of the 3rd. So it could be as short as like 30 minutes. It could be as long as about an hour and a half. It depends how long it goes. And I'm very excited for that. So you guys will see that when Game 1 of the World Series rolls around. We are going to take a 1-minute break for station identification. You are listening to Sports Talk. All right, back on Sports Talk now. We are going to move on to some college football action, where I will start college football this week by going over the new AP Top 25, where top 5 remained pretty similar. Alabama still number 1, 7-0. Ohio State number 2. Michigan moves up a spot to number 3. Clemson drops to number 4. Washington number 5. And then rounding out the top 10, you got Texas A&M at 6, Louisville 7, Nebraska 8, Baylor 9, Wisconsin 10. 11 through 20, you got Houston at 11, West Virginia 12, Florida State 13, Boise State 14, Florida 15, Oklahoma 16, Arkansas 17, Tennessee 18, Utah 19, Western Michigan up to 20, 7-0. Very impressive year for Western Michigan. Auburn 21, North Carolina 22, Ole Miss 23, Navy 24, and LSU at 25. So those are the new updated rankings for Week 8 of the college football season. Michigan really the big movers, up 8 spots to number 12, West Virginia. Tennessee, after suffering their second straight loss, drops to number 18, 9 spots. And then Ole Miss, after falling for the third time this year, drops 11 spots to number 23. So next we'll move on to arguably the biggest game of the week this week, between the number 6 Texas A&M Aggies and the number 1 Alabama Crimson Tide. According to Matchup Predictor, ESPN's Football Power Index, Alabama has about a 77% chance of winning the game over the Aggies. They are at home. This game set for 3:30 Eastern on Saturday. Alabama coming off of a 49-10 drubbing of number 9 Tennessee, while Texas A&M coming off of a bye week after they beat Tennessee in double overtime. So, it should be a very interesting game. Texas A&M usually has been known for a stronger offense than Alabama. They put up more yards per game, but Alabama scores more points per game and allows fewer points per game. So Alabama, when it comes to scoring, better in both areas than Texas A&M, even though a very big stat for this game that could be very crucial. Texas A&M gives up 437.5 yards per game. Alabama gives up 274. That is a massive difference. And it mainly comes from rushing yards, where Texas A&M gives up about 159 a game and Alabama gives up about 64 a game, which is the best in the country by far for the Crimson Tide. When you think of Alabama this year, you got to think of freshman quarterback Jalen Hurts from Channelview, Texas, 6'2", 209 pounds. He's been impressive this year, completing about 63% of his passes for 1,385 yards, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. That's a quarterback rating of 142.2, which is very impressive. His big game has mostly come against Ole Miss and Arkansas, where Arkansas he accounted for 4 touchdowns, and against Ole Miss he accounted for 146 yards on the ground and 158 through the air. So proving he's a real dual threat quarterback. So I think, honestly, my opinion, Alabama's going to win this game, but I would not be surprised if Texas A&M made this thing a classic. I could see this being like a 34-31 game, maybe even like 28-24, maybe. I mean, Alabama's defense probably won't give up much more than 30. So maybe even 21-17 if Texas A&M's defense comes to play. So I think Alabama will win, but I think they're going to have to put up a fight to do it. So that's the preview for this weekend's game between the Aggies and the Crimson Tide. We will now move on to the Heisman watch list, where obviously some big names on there for this week. You got, obviously, Lamar Jackson, who has been putting up numbers that's never been seen before, about sophomore from Louisville. Although he is coming off of a pretty performance against Duke. Deshaun Watson also on the Heisman list after a overtime win over North Carolina State to keep their undefeated year intact. JT Barrett, the junior out of Ohio State, he did okay as well. Like, I mean, he's picked off in the third quarter. He did score the eventual winning touchdown, but Watson, Barrett, and Jackson, none of them were really all that impressive on Saturday. Barrett has thrown for 16 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions, and has ran for 6 touchdowns in 6 games. Buckeyes play at Penn State this weekend, so keep an eye out. And then the big story of the year, Jabril Peppers, linebacker, listed as a linebacker defensive back, but he's also played quarterback, running back, wide receiver, punt returner. This guy does it all. He has 10 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 6 quarterback hurries, 344 return yards, 98 rushing yards, and 3 touchdowns in 6 games. Michigan comes back from a bye this week to face Illinois. And then you've got Jake Browning, the sophomore from Washington, who leads the FBS in passing efficiency. He has an FBS leading 23 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions. They're coming back from a bye as well to face Oregon State. You go to the senior running back, Donnell Pumphrey from San Diego State. He's the first running back to hit the 1,000-yard rushing mark this year. He's got 1,111 yards in the first 6 games of the season. He could be the 27th player in FBS history to rush for 2,000 or more yards in a season. Greg Ward Jr., Dalvin Cook, also Trevor Knight, and Christian McCaffrey to wrap out the top 10 for the Heisman Watch. So very interesting race heating up between a lot of very solid players. And it should be interesting to see how this works out to end the season. So we will end college football this week with who I believe will win the Power 5 conferences this year. In the ACC, I think it's pretty obvious you've got to go with Louisville. Louisville's already beaten their biggest competition in the ACC in Florida State. And they also have Lamar Jackson, who's the favorite for the Heisman right now. And they have shown no stopping of continuing to win. Breaking news while we're talking about this. A first inning run for the Cleveland Indians off of Marco Estrada after an error by Ezekiel Carrera. Francisco Lindor scored on a Mike Napoli double, and the Indians have a 1-0 lead in the bottom of the first. So the Blue Jays with a mistake early, and the Indians pounce on it to take an early 1-0 lead in Game 5 of the ALCS. But continuing on with our who I think will win the Power 5, I like Louisville. Very good defense, very solid quarterback. Very good team that hasn't showed me any sign of not being able to pick them this year. Now, the Big 12 might be my big kind of shocker to some people, and you can leave your feedback in the comments if you don't agree with me. But I believe that Baylor is going to win the Big 12. I have been very impressed with Seth Russell this year. And that Baylor team, after facing the scandals following Art Briles leaving. So I've been very impressed with Baylor, and I like them over West Virginia and Texas and Oklahoma. But, I mean, I know they haven't played any big key teams yet. They beat SMU, they beat Oklahoma State and Iowa State and Kansas, but they play Texas this week, they play TCU next week, and then Oklahoma the week after that. And I think if they can win 2 of those 3 games, especially the Oklahoma game, that they should be the favorites out of the Big 12, where that is very key for the future of Baylor. I think they could get a lot more recruits and a lot easier to forgive the what they did based on how they're doing this year. So moving on to the Big Ten, I like Ohio State, and let me explain why. I do think that it will come down to the Ohio State-Michigan game. I do think that Michigan has virtually the exact same defense in terms of in terms of pure fear for a team of any team in the country. Right now, according to ESPN's Football Power Index, Ohio State has a 50.5% chance to beat Michigan, with Michigan getting a 49.5% chance to beat the Buckeyes. I think my key when it comes down to this game is not the defenses. I think they're both going to come up and play. I think it's Wilton Speight versus JT Barrett. And I think this is going to be the key in this year's game. As much as Jim Harbaugh has built Michigan back into a powerhouse this year, you have to think Wilton Spate is an above-average starter. JT Barrett's a Heisman favorite. JT Barrett's been doing this for 3 years now. And JT Barrett has the experience. He's beaten Michigan before. And I think that's going to be the difference in why Ohio State wins that game and also wins the Big Ten. Moving on to the SEC, unless Texas A&M beats Alabama, Alabama is going to take the SEC again. Just too good. Jalen Hurts, that defense is best run defense in the country, best probably overall, top 5 overall defense in the country. Just Alabama all the time. Alabama's very, very solid. And Pac-12, ending out the Pac-12, not very big surprise. We got Washington. Washington has been a bit of a surprise in the fact that they're number 5 in the country this year. They play Oregon State this weekend, so not really a big scare for the Huskies. But after Oregon State, they play Utah. And later on in the year, they play USC. But they have already beaten Oregon and Stanford, both in blowout fashion. So Washington, very, very solid year this year for the Huskies, and I believe they will win the Pac-12. So that's going to conclude college football this week. We are going to move on to some preseason scores for the final couple days of the preseason. Washington Wizards defeat the Cleveland Cavaliers 96-91. The Miami Heat beat the Orlando Magic 107-77. The Atlanta Hawks defeat the New Orleans Pelicans 96-89. The Oklahoma City Thunder edged the Denver Nuggets 97-87. And the night game, the LA Clippers defeat the Sacramento Kings 92-89. So tonight, a couple games on tonight, if you were wondering and wanting to watch them, you have the Toronto Raptors taking on the Detroit Pistons, the New York Knicks taking on the Boston Celtics, the Indiana Pacers taking on the Milwaukee Bucks, Memphis taking on Minnesota, Houston and Dallas, Portland and Utah, and the night game Golden State and the LA Lakers. Golden State, we are officially a week away, I believe. Yeah, next Wednesday night is the regular season tip-off, where you will see a doubleheader on TNT between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the New York Knicks, and then the night game will be the San Antonio Spurs and the Golden State Warriors. So very interesting matchups there for opening night in the NBA. So I'm going to move on now to an interesting article I read yesterday that I think you guys will enjoy. It is about the GMs voting on certain things to happen this season. And I start with the big one. 97% of NBA general managers believe that we will have a rematch in this year's NBA Finals between the Warriors and Cavaliers. Cavaliers won last year, obviously, with Golden State winning the first year. So they think there's going to be a trilogy between these two teams. Also, in interesting news, 61% of the GMs that voted for the finals rematch believe that the Warriors will win the championship this year. So the addition of Kevin Durant, I am not sold on it yet, however. I believe that they lost very key pieces in terms of Harrison Barnes, Andrew Bogut, as well as Leandro Barbosa, and a couple key players on that bench that I think will really hurt them. They got better on offense, no doubt about it. Kevin Durant's going to give them an extra 30 points a game. But the problem is they might give up an extra 30 points a game with the players that left them on that defense. So that's just me. I think the Warriors made a mistake in terms of re-signing or bringing in. I think they made a good move in bringing Kevin Durant, but I think they made a mistake not re-signing Andrew Bogut and not re-signing Leandro Barbosa to be those quality bench players / defensive anchor in the paint. So other interesting results to the polls from the GMs. You have LeBron James being predicted to win his 5th MVP award this year. Greg Popovich was voted as the best coach in the NBA. No surprise there. Greg Popovich is awesome. The Warriors will not win 70 games this season, even though they are considered a better team. And then we move on to the rankings for best players in the NBA as voted by the general managers. I believe I'm only going to read off the top two just to save time. Best point guard, number 1, Steph Curry. Number 2, Russell Westbrook. I'd flip-flop those if I were them. I think Steph Curry is one of the best scoring players we've ever seen in the NBA. But Russell Westbrook, I believe, is a better player. We move on to shooting guard. You have James Harden, number 1, and Klay Thompson, number 2. I would replace Klay Thompson with Paul George. Best small forward, you have LeBron James, followed by Kevin Durant. I think they got that one on the head, nailed it. That is absolutely correct. Best power forward, you have Anthony Davis, followed by Draymond Green. And I believe that is correct as well, even though I think you could also make an argument for LaMarcus Aldridge. And then we move on to best center, where it's DeAndre Jordan 1, followed by DeMarcus Cousins 2. This one I completely disagree with. I think DeMarcus Cousins should be number 1, and Karl Anthony Towns, the second-year player for the Timberwolves, should be number 2, as he is one of the scariest up-and-coming players in the NBA. I don't think DeAndre Jordan just has what it takes. He's a great defensive player, great rebounder, but all he can do on offense is dunk. He can't play out of the post, and when you're a 7-foot center, you have to be able to play out of the post, and DeAndre Jordan just hasn't proven that to me. And until he can prove that to me, I'm not going to say he's the best center in the NBA. So that'll do it for the NBA basketball this week. We are going to take another 1-minute break for station identification, and then we will end the show with some NHL and NFL. You're listening to Sports Talk. Thanks, guys. All right, welcome back to Sports Talk. We are moving on to some National Hockey League action, where I will go over the standings early on in the season here, about a week in. Atop the Atlantic, you have the Tampa Bay Lightning with 6 points. Also with 6 points is the Ottawa Senators. Montreal in second with 5. Florida also with 5. Boston with 4. Toronto and Buffalo with 3, and Detroit with 2. In the Metropolitan, you got Washington and Pittsburgh tied with 5, New York Rangers with 4, New Jersey with 3, and as well as Philadelphia, Carolina and the New York Islanders each with 2, and the Columbus Blue Jackets with 0. The only team in the NHL, along with the LA Kings, to not have a point yet this season. Also, now moving on to the Western Conference, in the Central Division, St. Louis with the best record in the NHL with 7 points. Minnesota in second with 4, as well as Dallas, Colorado, and Chicago, and then Nashville and Winnipeg each with 2. And then in the Pacific, Vancouver, Edmonton, and San Jose each with 6. Calgary with 3, Arizona with 2, Anaheim with 1, and Los Angeles with 0, like I said earlier. So we'll move on to the early season scoring leaders in the NHL, where atop the league you have Brent Burns with 8 points, followed by Brad Marchand with 7, along with Erik Karlsson with 7, Vladimir Tarasenko with 6, and David Pastrnak with 6 as well. And then in terms of the goals against leaders, you have Ryan Miller, Peter Boudage, and Philip Grubier. for the Capitals, all allowing 0 goals a game. Liberto Luongo in 4th with .98 and Al Montoya in 5th with 1.3. Most goals in the league, Vladimir Tarasenko, David Pastrnak, and Richard Panik, and Austin Matthews, each with 4. Brenton Burns with 3. And then we move on to wins. Cam Talbot, Craig Anderson with 3. Ben Bishop, Marc-Andre Fleury, and Martin Jones with 2. Plus minus, Brad Marchand, Erik Karlsson, David Pastrnak, Brandon Carlo, and David Backus, each with 7. Plus 7 on the ice, which is very solid. And now my question for you guys, the audience, you can leave this down in the comments of the podcast. I have a question for you guys. If you had to build an NHL franchise, who would you build your team around? Austin Matthews or Connor McDavid? The superstar young rookie for the Maple Leafs, Austin Matthews, or as many people have called the next Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid. So think about that for you guys and leave your comments down under the podcast. I can't wait to read what you guys think. Personally, I'd rather have Connor McDavid just because I think he's more of a all-around balanced player. And although Austin Matthews has impressed in his first 3 games, it's only been 3 games, folks. Connor McDavid's been in the league for a whole year, and I think he's ready to take the league by storm and dethrone Sidney Crosby as the face of the NHL. So we will end the show this week with some NFL action. I will start, like I always do, with my Week 6 scores. San Diego beat Denver 21-13. Buffalo beat San Francisco 45-16. Washington beat Philadelphia 27-20. Tennessee over Cleveland 28-26. New York Giants defeat the Baltimore Ravens 27-23. New Orleans beats Carolina 41-38. Jacksonville over Chicago 17-16. Detroit over LA 31-28. Pittsburgh falls to Miami 30-15. The Bengals fall to the Patriots 35-17. Chiefs over the Raiders 26-10. Seahawks over the Falcons 26-24. Dallas over Green Bay 30-16. Houston in overtime edges the Colts 26-23. And Arizona defeats the Jets 28-3. So I believe big game, big upsets this week. Chargers over the Broncos, obviously. Saints over the Panthers, pretty impressive. Miami over Pittsburgh. Detroit over LA. And then I think everyone else, I think in every other game, the favorite did end up winning. So that's what we're going to start with Odell Beckham and the Giants' victory over the Baltimore Ravens. Ends up with 8 catches for 222 yards and 2 touchdowns on 10 targets, quickly doubling his receiving total on the season. He had about 200, and I believe he had, let me see. Up until that game, he had only 27 catches for about 300 yards. So he almost doubled his total in 1 touchdown. So on the season, he almost doubled his total for what he had heading into that game. And he also added 2 more touchdowns. So Odell Beckham, big game, Beckham. Bend it like Beckham. Whatever you want to say, Odell Beckham in his 3rd year out of LSU continues to impress in the NFL. Moving on to Ben Roethlisberger, who suffered a torn meniscus in his left knee against the Miami Dolphins, and he could reportedly miss more than a month with this injury, according to CBS News. He might not be back on the field until after Thanksgiving. So that's big news for the Steelers. It says he could be he's already been ruled out for this week's game against the Patriots, and it says this knee injury could keep him sidelined for the next 4 to 6 weeks. That could mean that he wouldn't be back. Worst case scenario, 6-week absence would mean that he's not back in the lineup until week 11 when they play the Giants. And then James Bradley, who performed the surgery, said apparently told the Steelers of the 4 to 6 week timetable. And Roethlisberger didn't sound too enthusiastic about a quick return on Tuesday as well. He missed 4 years last year after injuring 4 games last year after injuring his knee against the Rams. It wouldn't be crazy to see him come back because he has a history of playing through pain. But for now, the Steelers will move forward with Landry Jones as their quarterback. He started in 2 games last year, went 1-1, beat the Browns, and lost to the Chiefs. So that's big news for the Steelers with their starting quarterback out for the near future. Tyler Eifert practiced today. And that's what's going to bring us to our next segment of injury updates for Week 7. Doug Martin, beginning with Doug Martin, the Buccaneers running back, who was expected to come back after the bye week. He had a hamstring and didn't practice on Monday. And apparently, it says as of today, Doug Martin had a setback in practice, and he will be out this week. So against the 49ers. So all of you fantasy owners that have Doug Martin, you might as well bench him now. He is officially out for this weekend's game. Tyler Eifert, as of today, he practiced and will likely be questionable for Sunday's game against the Browns. That is big news for the Bengals that he is practicing again, as they play the Cleveland Browns that have allowed the most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So if Eifert can find a way to play, all you fantasy owners that have been waiting on Tyler Eifert to return could be in for a big week from Tyler Eifert. Eddie Lacy is expected to be out several weeks with a new ankle injury. That means that the newly acquired Niall Davis and Don Jackson will fill in at running back. Roethlisberger is expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks, like we covered. Will Fuller, he was active but didn't play on Sunday night. He will be tough to trust until we see him practicing in full pads again. Devontae Adams, he will not be ready to play against the Bears tomorrow night. Stephon Diggs, it seems like he would be ready to go this week, but we won't know until Friday. Dion Lewis, a Week 10 return sounds like is the most likely. Jordan Reed could play this week with a concussion. And Arian Foster, he still dealing with that hamstring and groin injury, likely will not play this week. So we will end the show today with our Week 7 predictions to end for the NFL this week. Let me give you the rundown of who's playing who this week in the NFL. As before we do that, I would like to point out to all you baseball fans that the Cleveland Indians have done it again. They take a 2-0 lead on a solo home run from Carlos Santana. That AAA pitcher Ryan Merritt we were so worried about 40 minutes ago, he's struck out 3 in 2 innings of solid work. No hits allowed. While Marco Estrada has given up 2 runs, 3 hits, and a solo shot to Carlos Santana. So in Game 5, in the top of the 3rd inning, the Indians have a 2-0 lead looking to advance to the World Series. So moving on to Week 7 predictions now. We have first on our list, Thursday Night Football is the Bears and Packers from Lambeau Field. And unless you're a really big Bears fan, I think you got to go with the Packers for this one. I am going to pick the Packers 31-14. Kind of a blowout. Giants taking on the LA Rams from London. And I like the New York Giants to continue their winning streak. I like them in a very close game, 31-28 over the LA Rams. Cleveland Browns traveling to Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. I like the Bengals in this one, especially if Eifert plays. I will give you 2 different scores for this one. If Eifert doesn't play, I say 24-13 Bengals. And if Eifert does play, I say 31-13 Bengals. New Orleans heading to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. And I like the Chiefs in this game, even though the Saints just beat the Panthers. I like the Chiefs 34-17. Indianapolis heading to face Tennessee. I like the Titans. 30. I like the Titans, yes, but I like them 21-17 over the Colts. Minnesota back in action, the last undefeated team in the NFL, heading to Philadelphia to take on Carson Wentz. And I like the Vikings in this one to keep their winning ways going. I like them 21-17. Washington heads to Detroit, and I like the Redskins. Keep their winning ways going. I'm picking Washington by a score of 28-21. Oakland heading to Jacksonville. I like Oakland. Score 24-20. Buffalo heads to Miami. I like the Bills 27-21. Then you have the Baltimore Ravens heading to New York Jets. Call me crazy, but I like the Jets in this one. 24-21. Tampa Bay heads to San Francisco. I like Tampa Bay 34-21. San Diego heads to Atlanta. I like Atlanta 31-24. New England on Sunday takes on Pittsburgh. I like New England. Sorry, Steelers fans, but without Ben Roethlisberger, I like New England 28-17. And although if the Pittsburgh Steelers win, I will dedicate a whole 15-minute segment next week to why the Steelers will win the Super Bowl if they can beat the Patriots without Ben Roethlisberger. Seattle taking on Arizona on Sunday Night Football. I like the Seahawks in this one, even though the Cardinals have had trouble finding their identity this year. And I like the Seahawks 28-24. And then Monday Night Football, Houston and Denver. I like Houston to pull off the upset on the road, 27-24. So that concludes this episode of Sports Talk. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next Wednesday at 4 o'clock, where we will have even more fun. I hope to see you guys there. Peace out from me.